First of all, by way of introduction, my name is Jody Rainsford. I'm a marketing strategist and I work predominantly with disruptive businesses and brands. And that's really what has drawn me to the rise of influencer marketing and its impact as one of these key trends that's arisen around a lot of the disruptive work people are doing in the marketing space. In today's fast-moving world, following and keeping up with consumer behaviour is really important, and as we find with a lot of the work we're doing, the traditional ways of doing things, they're no longer working, and that's why it's really important for business and brands to really understand how their customers are working, what they're doing in their lives, and really understanding their behaviour so they can tap into their audience better and effectively succeed in the future. Because if you aren't a brand or a business that is looking at how your customer interacts online, interacts with their friends, interacts with the people that matter to them, then there's a distinct possibility that you could end up lagging behind. And so that brings us in full circle really back to influencer marketing and influencer marketing today. And so who best to join me than Simon Freeman, who is the CEO of Freestack, the Endurance Sport Network. Simon, why should we be thinking about influencer marketing?
I think that actually, to sort of slightly nuance your question there, I think the question is why should we be thinking about it now? And I think one of the key reasons that people should be thinking about influencer marketing now is that despite it being such a nascent area of marketing, it's actually becoming harder already. There's already more pressure on finding the right influencers. We're finding a lot of brands that we're working with are that's one of the struggles that they have, is finding the right people to work with. There's also pressure around managing the influencers that brands are already working with. Again, you know, one of the wonderful things about influencer marketing is that it allows brands to work with lots of different people to get their message out to a wide range of end consumers. But that means that you've got to manage lots and lots of different influencers, all doing different things in their own way. And then the final thing is, one of the other challenges that's really growing is tracking the results of the activity. And that links back really to, if you're working with a number of influencers and you've got a number of campaigns working, how do you actually assess whether the influencer marketing activity that you're doing is having an impact? Another reason that we need to be thinking about influencer marketing now is the fact that competition is hotting up. I think it's probably not too dramatic to say that there's a bit of a land grab as far as influencers are concerned. You know, many of the brands that we speak to want influencers to, you know, have some degree of loyalty. They're not looking necessarily for ambassadors, but they want people who are going to kind of be loyal to their brand and be passionate about their brand. And of course, once somebody's working with one of your competitors, then they're off the scene, as it were.
So people are very much losing an early mover advantage in this sector because it's maturing very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there are certain you know, there are influencers. There are always influencers coming online. There are always people who are sort of growing their audience. So it's not like there's a completely finite number of influencers to work with. But if you know, there's lots of brands who are after the same sorts of people. They want the same audience. Therefore, they want the same influencers, and that leads to pressure. Yeah, that those brands that are getting in now and are hooking up with those influencers at an early stage are getting an advantage. Absolutely.
So it's not like in the previous situation that when a new technology or a new model of doing things arose, you had a lot of time to be able to assess it, sit back, see what other people are doing. This is an opportunity that's moving very, very quickly, like most sort of disruptive models and ways of working.
Yeah, and I think that one of the reasons for that is that we're not talking. Influencers are not a tech solution. Influencers are people, and you know, and I think that we talk about this all the time. And one of the key ways of getting influencer marketing right is acknowledging that the people that you're going to be dealing with are people, you know, they're humans, and they come with all of the sort of the messiness that humans tend to bring with them. So it's not to use a kind of tech parlance, it's not a very scalable. It's not scalable. It's just, you know, you're limited to the number of people who are going to take the time, put the effort into creating content. And once those people are working with other brands, then they're possibly not available to you. And then you know the third thing. Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I just if you just carry on with the third thing, what I'm going to say, I think probably feeds back into that.
Well, I mean, the third thing really is the reason people should be thinking about influencer marketing now is that they should be trying to figure out what results they should be getting. You know, it's hard to know whether influencer marketing can work for your brand if you don't actually know what it is that you're trying to achieve from that activity. So the sooner people are able to understand what it is that they can and should be looking to achieve, the sooner they're in a position to actually make the most of this opportunity.
The thing that you mentioned there was the messiness of dealing with people, and so this puts influencer marketing very much in a field of there is a right and a wrong way to do it, and it's not. It clearly doesn't seem it's something that you can pile into very quickly and easily, and then hope for the best. There are some consequences, and I think if we go into the next slide, you can see some of the consequences of either not doing this or not doing this the right way.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are those?
Well, okay, so the first one, which we've already mentioned, is lagging behind other brands. I mean, we often, you know, if you are any brand that has a particular target market, there will be competitors who are after the same target market. Therefore, they're after the same influencers. So, with the influencer landscape changing as fast as it is, some brands are getting to grips with influencer marketing quickly, and others aren't. You know, and our feeling is very much that those that are working in this sector now, even if they're not necessarily getting it 100% right all the time, but they're actually experimenting and trying to figure out what's going to work, those are the ones that are going to have an advantage. I mean, the second thing is wasting money and resources. I mean, the Freestack platform is designed to try and save people time and money in this influencer marketing sector, but nonetheless, there's still work that needs to be done and resources that need to be invested. So working with influencers without kind of a clear plan means that you risk wasting money and resources, and to some extent you risk wasting credit with influencers. You know, there's only so many times that you can go back to influencers and ask them to create content for your brand. So you want to make sure that you try and get things right very quickly.
Yeah, just in terms of putting the meat on the bones, when you say wasting time and money, I mean, how does that manifest itself for the brand trying to attempting to do this?
Well, there's a cost associated with. We've talked about trying to find the right influencers. There's a cost associated with that, whether that's something that you're trying to do yourselves or you're working with a company like Freestack. You know, there's a cost associated with finding the right influencers. Then when you do, you have to do something with them, whether that is if you've got a product, seeding a product, if you're an events organizer, it's inviting them to an event. You know, whatever you do with an influencer is going to have a cost. And you just want to make sure that those costs are, you see a return on investment, basically.
And in terms of other issues, I imagine that there is a much wider thing. You were talking there about credit with the influencers. So getting this wrong could potentially have a major impact on the way your brand is perceived, not just by influencers, but by other people in the market as well.
Yeah, 100%. You completely. And one of the things about influencers is that they influence influencers. I mean, they talk to each other, and yeah. You know, sometimes we'll see behind the scenes, if a brand is getting something wrong, they're asking for too much in return for too little, or there's some issue. The influencers will tell each other, and and I'm not suggesting that they are not forgiving. They are. It's not like they're kind of rabid and they're going to kind of tear every brand to pieces for doing it right. but you've got to kind of think through what you're trying to achieve and make sure that you actually kind of deliver value to the influencers so that they deliver value back to you as a brand, because that is going to be a key way of making influencer marketing work.
And that's a very different relationship than brands are used to having when they've for example in the sponsorship model, where you can have a certain amount of control over that, and so it seems like there's just a lot more factors involved that maybe people don't consider, or just need to consider before launching into this.
Well, yeah, and this is the double-edged sword about influencer marketing. That credibility and authenticity comes from the fact that the influencers are not owned media. They're not owned by the brand. What is owned is advertising and sponsored athletes, etc. Or at least it should be. Influencers are not owned, so they come with a lot of credibility. The problem is that you have to trust them that they're going to do the right thing by your brand. So this last point on the slide here is kind of missing brand objectives. I mean, if you want to, whether you want to increase product awareness or drive brand recognition or have an impact on sales, if you haven't got a good campaign, you're not running a campaign well with influencers and working with them to make sure that the messages are right. Not only can your campaign not really work for you, it can actually even be detrimental. It can kind of backfire somewhat, and that again comes back to the fact that influencers are people, and there's a messiness about dealing with people.
I mean, it certainly sounds like that there are opportunities for errors to be made, but ultimately the key benefits of getting this right hugely outweigh all the issues that can arise. Would you? I mean, you'd obviously say that in terms of being able to, like you just mentioned there, being able to tap into that sort of authenticity, being able to reach people in a way that's much more effective and much more authentic, and speaks to sort of your brand's values as well. But all that it really needs to do is it needs to be managed in the right way in order to avoid some of those mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And influencer marketing, let's emphasize this point, influencer marketing is not new. Influencer marketing is the guy that you go down the pub with who tells you that he's just bought a new bike and it's fantastic, or tells you he's just bought a new bike and it's horrendous. And that has an impact. That influences your perception and your attitude towards that brand. It's just done at scale. It's just these people are able to not talk to you in the pub, but talk to thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. So the opportunities are massive.
Yeah. So there's incredible opportunity. So, but it's all about going in, making sure that you go into it with the right mindset and the right objective set. So let's dig into that now then, in terms of sort of really getting started. What are the key things for people to start thinking about right at the very start of the process of planning a influencer marketing campaign?
Well, I think that this is the same whether you're talking about influencer marketing or any other type of marketing activity. The first thing is to define what success is going to look like. So are you aiming for brand awareness, or are you aiming for product awareness? Are you trying to drive sales? Who ultimately are you trying to reach with your campaign, and what are you looking to learn from your target market? I think once you started to define what that success looks like, then it becomes much easier to establish what your influencer marketing campaign should look like, because you're not then you can then help the influencers to deliver what is appropriate for your marketing goals.
And is that a difficult thing to define, especially if you've not run an influencer marketing campaign before, or is it sensible to look at what other brands have done, or do you have to judge each one on its own merits?
I mean, I think you can absolutely look at what other brands are doing, and learn from them, good and bad. But I think that, again, it's such a nascent area of marketing that one of the things that you can do is set an objective for a campaign, try it, see how that works, see what impact that has on your business. If it works, then do it again. If it doesn't work, then have a rethink. I think the point is that as long as you're getting some result, then you're able to iterate from that. the problem comes if you don't really know what you're trying to achieve from your influencer marketing. You don't know what success looks like. Therefore, it becomes almost impossible to work out whether there's been any return on investment, whether that's a very hard driving sales or whether that's a sort of a soft brand awareness. If you don't know what you're trying to achieve, then you're never going to know whether you've achieved it.
I know this is probably going to go on to the point you're about to make, though. But I wonder if there's there's a little bit of a myth that, in some ways, that because you're dealing with people, because you're dealing with they're effectively got their own audiences, that sometimes it might be very difficult to establish or measure success in this way. But if you're saying that if you do it the right way and you're realistic about it, then it is absolutely possible to establish objectives and get real results from it with measurable ROI.
Yeah, 100%. And
Okay.
what's really interesting, and we found this because we're obviously talking to our community of influencers on the Freestack platform all the time. They want to know what the brands that they're working with want. I mean, one of the frustrations that the influencers talk to us about constantly is not understanding what it is the brands are trying to achieve. And if the influencers are given that information, if the brand says to them, look, what we're trying to do is achieve X, then the influencers will almost invariably target or create content or work in a way with the brand that actually achieves those end results.
And so, I imagine this is part of the opportunity at the moment as well, that people are happy to do that. That while influencers are at work in partnership with brands in this way, they still have this this goodwill in terms of making sure that they're hitting the brand's objectives in that way.
Yeah, and one of the key things that we've learned since starting to build our influencer community is that the vast majority work with brands that they like. They work with brands that they respect, that they're into, that they're interested in. They work with brands that they're drawn to, and therefore, if they can do a good job, which allows them to then create a long-standing relationship with those brands, they will. They're not, the vast majority are not in it for a free pair of trainers. They're in it because they want to establish a relationship both with the brands they're working with and the audience that they're talking to.
See, that's incredibly powerful. That's incredibly powerful, both in terms of both in terms of like the power that the influencer has in the sense they're not swayed, like you say, by a free pair of trainers, but also in how invested those influencers are in helping you reach.
Oh, we've just lost Jody. Oh, you still there, Jody?
Yep. Did you hear me there?
No, I think you dropped off for a second.
Well, I was just saying that was it. That's an incredibly powerful position to be in, both in terms of as an influencer, to be able to have influencers who are so heavily invested in your product and also invested in your goals, and so making sure that you have the right match there and picking the right influencers is. We're going to come on to that, but. I imagine that's like a key part of ensuring the success of any program.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we really encourage brands to do when they're using the platform, they create what we call a campaign, is write down, actually put into words what it is that they're trying to achieve, and really tell the influencers about their brand strategy. I mean, what's also interesting is that a brand that is prepared to really get into this influencer sector can learn from the influencers. Bearing in mind these influencers are in constant dialogue with the brand's target market. That's why you've selected them. So if you talk to them about your brand strategy, the feedback you can get, not only are those influencers going to say, well, okay, great, let us help you achieve that, but they're also probably going to be able to advise you on what sort of things could potentially work. They could even open up your eyes to other ways or other things that you could be doing, or other strategies that you could employ. So it should be a really two-way process, a two-way dialogue.
And I imagine it's almost like a change in mindset as to how brands have traditionally tried to reach their audience, and now you have someone who effectively sits in between those two things, who could almost act as a conduit and serve both of those audiences well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the third point on this slide is what is realistic. And I think that one of the key things that we aim to bring to the party is helping the brands to know what is realistic. So having one objective, having a single priority for a campaign. You know, if you've got multiple objectives, it's very difficult then to understand whether a campaign has worked. So we really want to help brands to understand what they should be doing in order to get the most out of this.
Okay, so let's move on to actually, building a campaign out. Let's go through each of these sort of very quickly, and then dive into each one individually. So we were talking about at the start. This is about the three key elements. What are the three key elements that brands need to focus on to guarantee the success of any influencer marketing campaign?
So we think that the three elements are discovery, i.e. finding the right influencers; management, i.e. making sure that they work with you, you work with them in the most effective manner, and then reporting so that you know what the return on investment has been.
Right. Okay. And so, let's go into each of those in detail, and focus on discovery. With each of these, it's probably worth talking about whether people whether there's any sort of key mistakes or key issues people have with these, or that you see with your sort of vast experience with the brands and the products that you've worked with. When it comes to discovery, what is there like a key mistake or a key error that's worth avoiding, to look out for right from the start?
Well, I don't think it's a mistake. I think it's an entirely understandable reality.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that brands do by accident is they end up picking influencers just because they just by luck, they're the one that happens to have sent the email at the right moment. So rather than selecting from a group of influencers, they end up either trying to work with everyone who's contacted them, or just picking 2 or 3 at random, because finding influencers is really time consuming. So probably leaving it down to luck is something that we see a lot of brands doing, which is a bad move.
And what about choosing them? Are there any other criteria? Is there a particular type of criteria you should use to pick influencers? Is there anything to think about in terms of that a certain criteria is suitable for certain types of brand, or will it just completely depend on what you're looking for?
So it comes back to this. Have an objective, but then once you've got your objective, once you know what you're trying to achieve, you want to look at some specific criteria, like brand affinity, the credibility of the influencer, the type of audience they're talking to, their professionalism, the kind of content that they're creating. All of those sorts of things allow you to hone in on the right sorts of influencers to work with.
Okay, and so what if you were going to say, what are the key things to keep in mind when we're thinking about choosing the right influence? What would you suggest someone doing when they're setting out to on this discovery stage?
I think once you've started with an understanding of what you're trying to achieve and what your objectives are, then fitting the influencers to the people. So look beyond the numbers. Don't just go for the person who's got the most Instagram followers. Try and understand what kind of content they create, how much they engage with their audience, whether they're, in some cases brands will say, well, my objective is that I want content that I can share on my own channels. So as much as I'm interested in the reach of the influencer, I'm interested in creating content for my own channels. So at a very basic level, make sure that the influencers you're selecting can create really beautiful content or really effective content. What their tone of voice is, their visual style, those sorts of things.
So it's also about considering the medium by which they're expressing themselves and by which their audiences are engaging with them. It's taking all of those things into account. It's more sort of a rounded view of how this influencer can particularly add value to what we're doing.
Yeah, so one of our clients, Caxton, is using the platform, and one of the campaigns that they've been running has an objective of generating video content. So it's at a very basic level, but what they've done is they've found the influencers on the Freestack platform who create really engaging little videos, because that's what they're looking for. Whereas in other cases you might say, well, as a brand we're looking for blog content to help us with organic SEO, in which case you want to find the copywriters. Or you might decide that you want somebody who is already taking part in participating in, really exciting events that are the right sort of events for your target audience. So go and find the influencers that are already doing that stuff, rather than rather than picking an influencer and then trying to convince them to do something that they're not necessarily comfortable with. So one of the things that we have on the platform is an area where influencers can pitch. So an influencer that's already doing something, whatever it is, cycling around the world, can pitch and say, this is what I'm doing, this is the coverage that I'm going to be generating, and I'm looking for support in the form of X, Y, and Z. And then a brand can say, well, okay, that fits with what I'm trying to achieve, so I'd like to support that influencer and help them, do what it is that they're setting out to do.
And so there's two ways of doing it. There's either, as I imagine that, like you were saying before, that one of the issues is that picking people that just come to you and just basically pitch to you. But there's a different way of doing it. There's either going out proactively and searching for people who fit your specific needs and objectives, but there's also ways of identifying or letting people identify themselves who are doing things, which you can then decide for yourself whether those are relevant or fit in with your brand's objectives or your strategy going forward.
Yeah.
Is there
Absolutely.
is there any advice in terms of how well established influencers are in terms of what makes sense for brands to do? Like you said, the market's maturing very quickly, and there's almost like this land grab going on. Is it better to put the effort into working with more established ones, or is it actually worth focusing on up and coming and tracking those? What's your sort of advice around that?
So I think that both, new influencers that are trying to make their name, who are trying to create an audience and trying to make their name, are going to be hyper enthusiastic. They're the people that are going to want to work with brands and really collaborate because they're trying to achieve something for themselves, which is kind of growing their audience. More established influencers obviously come with a ready-made audience that you can talk to. The reality is that they understand the value of what they've built, so they're going to be looking to probably monetize what they've built. But it just depends entirely on what you're trying to achieve.
Right. Okay. So, is there anything else then in terms of discovery that we need to that we haven't mentioned that's worth people considering when they're selecting the right influencers for their campaign?
I think one of the things is just trying to figure out a way of making the search process work for you as a business. You can't if people are emailing you at all times of the day and night, you've got to figure out how you can dedicate some time to the process so that you end up with a kind of a process by which you can select the right influencers, which is easier said than done.
Okay, so let's move on to the second key element, and that's management. So, what stage are we talking about in management? We're talking about the campaign is set up and the execution's going ahead. So, what are the challenges that people may have when it comes to actually trying to manage an influencer campaign?
Well, probably it's that for most brands, the process of management is fairly manual and therefore time-consuming. So how much time is it going to take, or how much time would it take for you to effectively manage the influencers that you're working with? And I think that in many cases brands feel as though that sort of the end result is not optimal simply because they haven't had time to stay on top of the number of influencers that they want to work with. And in many cases the beauty of influencer marketing is that you can work with quite a few people at once. Which is a great way of reaching a wide and varied audience, but comes with its own challenge, which is that you've suddenly got loads of people all doing different stuff at different times, and you're trying to keep on top of all of that.
And so I mean, let's just paint a picture here for if you are a brand or or you have a product and you've not done this before. What does that actually look like? Does that mean, you know, handling constant email inquiries? Is that you know, having your time taken up with phone? I mean, what does management of this actually look like if you're not outsourcing this to someone else?
So in terms of, I mean, there's two elements to this really. One is keeping an eye on all the content that's being created. So you probably at that point need tools so that you can see everything that's being created by the influencers almost as it's being created. Make sure that it's in line with the campaign objectives and your brand objectives, etc. The other key thing that you've got to think about is how you use the content that's being created. So again, what we see sometimes is that brands will run an influencer campaign, generate a load of content, and then not have the time or the facility to do anything with that content. So again, you know, the end result is that it all just feels as though it didn't quite work, and it's not really the influencer's fault, and it's certainly not the brand's fault. It's just that without a kind of a tool and a clear process for using the content that was created, it just ends up not having the impact that it should.
And so, what's the best way of avoiding that? Is there a way of being able to avoid that in advance, or is that just purely putting more resource into that?
Well, it would be easy to say throw more resource at it, but I think almost every company that we deal with is stretched. You know, the marketing departments are stretched to the max. So just saying, well, they just need to throw more resource at it is not practical. Starting by briefing the influencers so they understand what the expectations are is really key. You know, so if you're saying to the influencers, what I really want is video content, and I'd like something every week, and I want you to send it in this way at this time to this address or whatever. You know, as long as those expectations are set, then you've got a much better chance of not having to run around the internet trying to find what the influencers are doing. So ideally, you know, and I'm bound to say this because this is what Freestack does, the platform does, is using a tool that shows you all of the activity that is linked to your influencer campaigns in one place. Obviously makes that process of managing the content a lot easier. The other thing that's available through the Freestack influencer platform is an ability to message all of the influencers in one go. So they set up the method by which they want to receive the communications, and that means that you're not texting one, WhatsApping another, emailing two others, and trying to, you know, phone the fifth one. You can just send all the messages through the platform in one go. It makes the whole process really simple. You can see who's opened messages and responded to them in one inbox. So again, just trying to streamline that process so that it doesn't become overwhelming.
The big question with that is, although that, you know, that sounds brilliant in terms of what brands can do, how do the influencers feel about that? Does that benefit? I mean, you speak to the influencers all the time. You have you know, a strong relationship with that. Is that preferable to them rather than having lots of different points? Do they like that certainty of knowing you know, what they need to do at certain times, or you know, or do they prefer to be you know, just left to get on with it?
So so nobody likes to be micromanaged, and that is true of influencers, and you know, a lot of the influencers, in fact, all of the influencers are creating content because they want to inspire people, and creating the content, they're getting out and doing stuff is the whole point. So you've got to bear that in mind. But again, it comes back to this: all of the influencers on the Freestack platform, and I've got to emphasise, we don't have an open door policy. We're really selective about who we allow on the platform. They all want to work with brands in a way that is mutually beneficial. So it's back to this point that we made earlier. You know, the influencers want clarity on what's expected of them, and clarity of communication. What they don't want is to do what they think they should be doing because they've been given no guidance and they've had no communication from the brand, to then find out 6 months down the line, 3 months down the line, that the brand is really upset because it's not what they wanted, and that relationship has then stalled. That's not why the influencers are in it. So they would prefer, or they're telling us that they would prefer to have a method by which they can, easily communicate with the brands that they're working with, and vice versa, the brands can easily communicate with them.
I mean, everything we've spoken about so far, everything seems to come back to this common theme of the communication, and making sure communication is as straightforward and as simple and as open and as clear as possible. And that seems to be a really important aspect and thing to facilitate, to make sure at least these first two steps work really well.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the third element then, and this is really where brands are probably most interested in, because there's no point in doing any of this if you don't see results from it, and
Correct.
It's impossible to obviously see results if you're not reporting on it correctly. So what are the big mistakes that people are making in terms of reporting, or in terms of failing to do the reporting properly?
Well, I just think that that getting to the end of whatever the campaign has been, with all the investment, time and financial investment that it's taken, and not knowing whether it's had an impact, not knowing how to justify that investment, is the mistake that some brands make. I'm going to say many brands,
right?
Because it's really hard to do. It's hard to track. We've just talked about, how do you manage influencers when they're all over the place? They're all using different channels, different platforms. They're off on their adventures using your kit, or they're involved in races or events that you've put on. Whatever that happens to be, they're generally hard to pin down. So when you come to the end result, it can be equally difficult to understand exactly what impact a campaign has had. So that's really the one mistake, I think.
And then, so what would you suggest are the key elements that they need then, in terms of making sure that they get reporting right, and making sure that they're picking the right metrics, and they're pulling those together in a meaningful way? What would your suggestions be?
I mean, the main thing is to avoid vanity metrics, which are probably the easiest to measure. So I'm suggesting actually that this is it's even harder than it first seems, because the key thing here is when you've got to go back to what your objectives are. So once you understand your objectives, then you can start to figure out what impact the activity has had.
So when you say vanity metrics, just to be clear to people watching this, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, one of the basic things that you can look at is impressions, but actually, an impression without any engagement doesn't really have much in the way of impact. Or if you said, what we're looking for is positive brand or positive sentiment about a product, and actually all you can measure is reach, then you don't know whether that reach was good or bad. So it's understanding what it is that you're trying to get out of and for every campaign that we run, for every client, there'll be a different set of, or different objectives, or different priority. And so we fit the measurement, the analytics, the reporting to what it is that they're trying to achieve as far as we possibly can.
Okay, and so is that important? That's important to establish at the start. It's basically, no matter how many campaigns you're running, or what activity you're running, you need to get this baseline set of metrics that are important, and then make sure that you constantly use them throughout every campaign in order to generate some sort of consistency. Or what's the best way of doing that?
Well, ideally, I mean, if you can start to track metrics across different campaigns, and you can start to see what's working better. I mean, I have to say that there's also marketers also have to be realistic. Again, we're talking about people. In some cases, I mean, we had a campaign recently, or we were talking to a brand about a campaign recently that had an affiliate element to it. And obviously, one metric that you measure there is how much sales it generated. But the brand was open-minded enough to say, well, actually, there's also an aspect of, if the influencers are creating great content but not necessarily driving massive amounts of sales, we're equally happy with that, because we don't have a single objective here. We're also happy. So there's you have to be a little bit nuanced about this. It's not just as straightforward as purely about numbers, I don't think.
Okay, and can you, in terms of reporting, is there like a specific example you can use, just to sort of bring this alive, really, in terms of a good example of how to do reporting well? Because I imagine this is one of those ones where until you sort of dig into it yourself and you start actually putting a campaign together and really knowing what you're looking for, it must be quite a difficult thing to sort of picture in your mind's eye. Do you have like an example from a recent client that you can explain?
So yeah, absolutely. So we had a campaign recently on the platform for a US sock brand called Stance, who are launching in Europe, and the campaign, the overarching campaign, was that there would be runs in various cities around Europe, looking at street art. So if you know Stance, then you know that they're quite a punk kind of band. So street art fits very much with the sort of ethos and the design aesthetic of the brand. So they looked for influencers in all of those different cities, obviously with the objective of looking at street art. So there was a particular type of influencer that they were looking for, invited them to come and be part of these events. And one of the things that we did was ensure that each of the events had a city-specific hashtag. So that allowed us then to track specifically the content that was being generated around each of those different events, analyze where that was going, how far that content was being spread. And the other thing that we did as part of, so that was the brand awareness element of it, as part of the campaign, each of the cities that one of these events took place in, we worked with a local retailer, so we were also able to start to understand what impact that had on that local retailer's, you know, how this activity was having an impact on the sort of business metrics for those retailers and that retail activation.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's incredibly powerful in terms of what you can achieve, just making sure that you get your metrics right, your reporting right. In terms of, I mean, let's sort of like we've covered in detail now each of the key challenges, and I imagine that there's a feeling, but because of the complexity or the seeming complexity of having to manage like these personal relationships, everything, it may seem that sometimes there are like quite a lot of obstacles in the way. So I think it's just beneficial as we're wrapping up now to sort of restate what the benefits are. When influencer really works well, and you've seen this with the successful, profitable campaigns that you've run. What is it that like a really pleased brands that are really happy with what they found? What have they got out of it? What have they achieved?
I mean, I have to say I could probably go on about this for an hour, but I won't. I think that the key things are the brands have found that working with influencers is a really efficient way of getting to their target market. They can see engagement, they can see the activity taking place, and it's also a really authentic way to reach that target market. I mean, there's lots and lots and lots of data out there about how consumers are less and less trustworthy of advertising, and at the same time the balance is tipping towards influencers being more and more engaged with the opinions of people that they trust, and once you get past family and close personal friends, influencers are kind of very very quickly following on as a trusted source of information. So it's efficient, and it's also really authentic. I think influencer marketing is a great way to grow customer engagement. I don't know. Again, there's lots of data out there about how much people are engaging with traditional types of marketing, and it seems to be declining. Whereas customers are definitely engaging with influencer content. Whether that's a good or a bad thing. I mean, in some cases, it's not always a good thing, and we can all think of kind of car crash scenarios where so-called influencers have put content out that hasn't gone down all that well. But engagement is key, and so getting customers to engage with content that's been created by influencers about your product or your brand or your service or your event is really powerful. And we mentioned this right at the top of this webinar. Getting ahead of competitors. good influencer activity now will put any brand really at the head of the tip of the spear, as far as, there's a lot of opportunities within the endurance sports, the running, cycling, outdoors, triathlon sector right now, to get ahead of competitors. So I think those are a few of the benefits of good influencer activity.
And so, and then, let's sort of like tie this up and summarize this. What are we effectively saying to people here? What is it they've got to think about when they're thinking about influencer marketing, or when they're, if they're running activity at the moment, what should their focus be on now? If they're not doing it yet, should they start testing? How would you sum up what we've talked about in a sort of a few sentences, for people who are listening to this to go away with?
I think that now is the time to start or increase activity, and brands can definitely still be in a testing phase. I'm not suggesting that they have to be getting everything right immediately off the bat, but they should avoid paralysis by analysis. Get involved, start to find some influencers, work with them, rather than sort of treating them as a channel. Actually figure out how they can collaborate with those influencers, and learn from the process. But the sooner the better. I just think that this is a very nascent area of marketing, and there's opportunities. As we mentioned, there is a bit of a land grab around the influencers who want to work with brands. So starting to find some influencers that are going to align themselves with your brand now I think is going to be would be a really good idea. The good news is that the influencer marketing sector is growing. There's more people coming online. There's good influencers coming through. I mean, we're seeing some influencers who are generating some really great content, and they're starting to grow their audience, and they're really enthusiastic. So there's lots of new opportunities. But once if you buy into that, and you think that influencer marketing is something that you do want to get started with, or you do want to increase and really start to make it a part of your overall marketing mix, then managing and tracking is absolutely crucial. You've got to be able to report to the boss. Everyone's got a boss. You want to be able to go back to the person that signs off the marketing budgets and say, here, look, this is what we did, and this is what it achieved. And be able to have be able to have budget to do more. Make sure that you're able to track and follow your influencers as they're creating content about you, and in fact just as they're creating content about themselves, because that's actually really useful as well. So yeah, management and tracking I think are absolutely essential.
Now, and I think something that comes out, that it may seem, that from everything we said, that there's a lot.
No.
And I think we'll deal with some questions next. But if you're listening to this, if you hang on till after the questions, and I think there'll be something that we're going to offer, which may be actually very useful in terms of if you're thinking about this, or you want some expert opinion, or ideas about how you can use it. It might be worth just carrying to listen to after the questions. We've got a couple of questions, Simon, which would be worth going over. And if you've got a question, now is the time to type it in. One of the questions comes from Steph, and the question is, can you see a trend amongst influencers in terms of follower engagement and how they deal with that issue?
Wow, can you see a trend amongst influencers in terms of yeah, I think Instagram is challenging in terms of how influencers are able to engage with followers. I think that's something we're going to be blogging about fairly soon. I'm sort of slightly struggling with a trend amongst influencers in terms of their follower engagement. I just think that we're actually going to be blogging about that next week, so it's probably something that we can cover off in a blog, and if anyone wants to, we'll send that out to make sure that everyone gets our opinion on that. But I think it's quite a big issue. It's probably for another webinar, actually.
Great. And is there a particularly effective way of working with influence, in your opinion, if you are just looking to say drive brand awareness? Is there a really effective way of doing that?
I think probably in terms of awareness, the brands that are doing it really well are the ones that are allowing influencers to put their own spin on the activity, or put their own spin on working with those brands. So whether that's using a product in their own way, or tackling events using products, but just kind of putting it into the hands of the influencers and then trusting them that they're going to get on and create content in a really authentic way. That's probably the best way to create brand awareness, or to drive brand awareness.
Okay, so if there aren't any more questions, let's move on to, what is it? If you've listened to this, and you may have listened to this, a lot of this may have resonated with you, or some of this may have got you thinking, and something that you might pondering whether you should test this out or not. What would you suggest are the next steps from this, Simon?
Okay, so there's a few things in there. In terms of one next step, last year we produced the Freestat Pulse report, where we interviewed brands and influencers, and we asked them about their opinions. We asked them for their opinions about influencer marketing, all different aspects of it. We're about to launch the 2017 version of that Pulse report, so we'll be sending out a link to that questionnaire to anyone that wants to participate. And what we'll do is anyone that does fill in the survey will receive a copy of the report when we've produced it. The idea is that we'll be able to create both a picture of what influencer marketing looks like in 2017 in the endurance sports and outdoor sector, but also compare what's happened over the last 12 months. So that's one thing for next steps, and make sure that everyone that was on this webinar gets sent a copy of that, a link to fill in the report, so that we can then send them a copy when it's been produced. We'd also like to offer anyone that was on this webinar a consultation, so really digging down into what your campaign ideas are, the metrics that you're using, any previous campaigns that you've delivered that we can audit, anything like that, so we can start to take some of these rather more generic ideas that we've discussed today and kind of drill down into them with specific focus on your brand. And then the other thing is that we are happy to offer brands that want to try out the platform, a sort of a one-off trial campaign at a reduced price, so that they can get an idea of what it's able to deliver. And again, what we'll do is we'll make sure that we send a note to everyone that's been on this webinar, explaining how that would work and how they can take that up if that's something that they want to get involved in.
And is that one-off trial campaign, is that how most brands that you work with long term end up working with you? That it's a case of sort of gaining expertise and ideas from you as to the best way to work, testing it out, and then developing that going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I wouldn't expect someone to dive straight into a year-long subscription to a platform before they've had a chance to see what it does for them. And in most cases, what happens is that we run a campaign for 12 weeks, and then at the end of that 12 weeks, it just continues into a subscription. But it allows the brand at least to kind of see what the platform's capable of delivering, what sort of influencers we've got on there, and how we can help a brand to make the most of their influencer activity.
The one thing I'm really looking forward to, and I would suggest when you receive the Pulse report, reading last year's, and I'm really interested to see how much things have changed with when the Pulse report comes out for this year. Are there any things that you're expecting in terms of the way that influencers or brands are changing the way that they do this activity?
I think that what we're probably expecting, or certainly hoping for, is that brands will be investing more. I was about to say more money, but just investing more generally in influencer marketing. I mean, from trade shows that I've attended, right the way through to sort of individual conversations I've had with brands, influencer marketing is becoming a more pressing and urgent need or imperative So I think that what we're going to see is that there's going to be more and more brands looking to get involved in influencer marketing. But we'll see what the data says.
Well, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm aware of the time, and I don't ideally want to break this over an hour. So I think this is a good opportunity to wrap up. What are your details, Simon? If people want to get in contact with you directly or want to set up that consult.
So my email address is really simple. It's simon@freestack, frwstak.com. My number is 07590 115900. That's a UK number. So 0044 at the beginning if you're calling from outside the UK. If you go onto the Freestack website, you'll find lots of opportunities, lots of ways in which you can contact us. So yeah, please get in touch if you've got further questions or you want to discuss your particular business objectives. We'd be really delighted to have a conversation about that.
Okay, so I think that just remains for us to wrap up the webinar. I want to thank everybody that has attended the webinar and stuck right through to the end. As Simon said, if you have any further questions, please get in contact with Simon at simon@freestack.com or to set up your consult. There are plenty of resources. We'll send through the pulse reports to you as well. Yeah, just thank you very much for your time, and goodbye from me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jody, and thanks everyone for coming on to the webinar. Appreciate it.